JKK, here's the thing about that. I think it is... So I guess it depends on how you mean the question, right? Hey, shalom to you as well, Hassan. If you mean it in terms of the worst addiction, as in like quantitatively compared to other sins, then I would say no. If you mean it in terms of, is it the worst addiction, like, I guess I would say worst is in the hardest to kick, then I would say, yeah, I think so. Because if you think about all other types of addictions that are out there, that one has the least amount of, like material and like clear impact, for lack of a better word. Like if you go do a bump of cocaine, right, like that's gonna be pretty obvious to everybody. But you can jump in a bathroom and look at pornography and then come right back out and nobody knows the difference. And so it's in terms of that, and in terms of how acceptable it is in society, and the level of access and how easy it is to access, yeah, it's really destructive, and it eats away at the soul in a way that, and the brain, yep, you nailed it, right? It eats away at the soul and the brain in a way that we generally don't register for quite some time. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like hardest to kick, just a highly destructive addiction, like it messes a person up in so many ways. So yeah, I agree with you. It is, in that context, it is the worst addiction ever. Let's see, Hassan, blessings of the Lord going with you. Yeah, 100, man. They're going well, my friend. I mean, God is always good, right? Even in the trial, because what do the trials do? They develop perseverance. Why is God inaccessible if he truly wants us to believe this is real? That is a fantastic question, and I'll answer that with a really interesting story. So my son today is 13, but when he was 9, I believe it is, recommendations were restricted in search results because your life does not comply with the For You feed LP standards. Reason. Well, I just made, I think I just made it mad. Whoops. I guess I'm not supposed to use, okay. I guess I should have said corn, my bad. All right, well, hopefully that doesn't mess up this live stream. Let's see. Okay, so let me answer your question, PYTN. So why is God inaccessible? All right, so let's talk about that. So when my son was 9, he came to me and he asked me the exact same question. He said, if God wants me to believe that he's real, why doesn't he show up right here, right now? And it was interesting because for a moment, I just had to stop and think about it. And then I felt like the Holy Spirit gave me the answer just like instinctively. And so what I told him was, if God were to appear right now in front of you, would you have any choice but to believe him? And not just believe in him, but you have to think about things in terms of the power imbalance. Like, God is so much more powerful and so much further beyond us in every possible way. If he were to show up and appear to us, we would lose the capacity to be able to choose him, because we would almost instinctively have to choose him out of either fear or awe. There would be no opportunity for us to get to know his character separate from his glory, right? And so the reason that God makes himself, and to say it's inaccessible, I think is not quite the most accurate way to put it. I would say he greatly limits the expression of himself, so that we have the ability to observe his character in creation and in relationships. And through that process, that is how we come to know him. In my beliefs, I either do or don't, and I am simply not convinced. Interesting. Okay, so let me ask you this. Is the point of your question for me to demonstrate to you the existence of God, or is the point of your question to understand from someone who walks with God why he seems inaccessible? Because those are two different answers, right? Like, my goal here isn't to debate or prove to anybody that God exists. Yeah, 100%. What's up, Leah? Gotta figure out how to unflag these comments. It's like it's showing me that a comment's filtered, but I can't figure out how to unfilter it. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. I'm hoping your comment didn't get filtered, PYTN. Comment settings, filter comments. Show the most sent, blocked keywords, enter on live. Weird, okay. So it's saying that some of the comments are filtered. I'm wondering if your comment got filtered here, PYTN. Because the only thing I'm seeing is conclusion if you put anything else in there. That's super weird. Let's review the hidden comments, okay. I understand what you're saying. Okay, so let me just, I want to frame your question and just make sure I'm understanding it in the right way. So let me ask you this way. So you're saying if you were to tangibly see God, right? Like if he were to somehow show up to you in a manifestation that you could see with your own eyes, at that point you would believe in his existence. And the thing you're wrestling with is, because I can't see him with my own eyes, therefore I can't believe that he exists. Is that an accurate representation of where you're at? Yeah, 100%. So, okay, so I think maybe the way I would approach this is, honestly, I would approach it by sharing how I got where I got to, because I came to the same issue that you did. So early in my journey, I came to the realization that I had a kind of moral compass that my parents had given to me, and I didn't, at least that's what I thought it was anyway. There were a lot of things that I wanted to participate in life that I was kind of restrained from, and I couldn't quite figure out why I was restraining myself. It just didn't make any sense to me. And so I set out to determine if the thing holding me back was my own moral compass, my own beliefs, or if they were beliefs that were given to me by my parents. And so what that took me to was really the first point in my life where I had to consider the possibility that there may be no God, and that all of the stuff that I believe were beliefs that were given to me. They're not beliefs that I actually came to on my own. And so when I hit that point, I guess the best way I could put it is I realized that it was like a thought exercise was necessary, and that if what I believed was true, it would still remain true whether I believed it or not. And so I should be able to release all of those beliefs, and then if that was still true, I would find my way back to the same destination. And so that was kind of the starting point of my process. And I'm going to walk you through this because I think it'd be easier for me to answer the question by just kind of walking you through the process that I took, because it sounds like you're in a very similar place that I was when I started this path. And strangely, like the way that I came to God was actually by following just a very logical path. So I'll kind of walk you through that. So basically I hit that point first where it was like, all right, let's just pretend for a moment that everything I've ever known is unknown. Like maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, I don't know, but we're going to start from ground zero. And so from ground zero, I had to kind of I guess put framework or guardrails on my thought process, because you can't do a proper thought exercise. Thought exercise is a lot like an experiment, right? It's like a thought experiment. There has to be boundaries that help to frame in, and guardrails to make sure that you don't get off into like the imaginary and places that don't make sense logically. And so what I did is I started going down this path, and I said, okay, what are the guardrails that we have to work within? So the first guardrail I started with was there was no possible way that I was going to prove that God existed or didn't exist with verifiable evidence in my lifetime. And the reason I had that conclusion was that for thousands of years, people have been arguing about, is there a God, is there not a God? And then the ones who believe in a God, they're arguing about which God is the biggest God, right? And so as a result of that, I basically concluded that, okay, in my lifetime, I have a finite amount of time on this planet and a finite amount of resources. And if they haven't been able to figure it out in thousands of years, and nobody can still nobody can agree on this thing, then that tells me that this is not a problem that I'm going to be able to resolve definitively in my lifetime. And so I had to start that as a guardrail, that coming to conclusive evidence was not going to be feasible. And so that was my first guardrail. My second guardrail was that that I had to work from what was observable and use that as the starting point, but not necessarily the ending point. And so it was basically, I kind of committed myself mentally to only working from what was observable, but not from the starting point that there is no God and there is only what's observable, but rather from the starting point that I have to work from what's observable and see where it takes me, essentially. And so those were kind of like my two primary guardrails. I'm not going to be able to get there with definitive evidence in my lifetime, and I need to work from what's observable to something else, right? And so from that starting point, I then began a thought experiment. And so I envisioned myself being on a deserted island where there were no other human beings, there was no outside influence, there was nothing to try and explain to me anything, right? And so I said, okay, like what types of thoughts might I have if I'm in this situation, right? And so then in order to kind of inform that thought process, I looked back throughout the course of human history, and I asked myself, well, all human beings have kind of found themselves in this place at some point or another throughout the course of human history. And so what are the questions that they asked? Like what are where's the continuity in human history that might suggest what types of questions I might come up with if I'm on this deserted island by myself? And what I realized is that every single human being in the course of human history, or at least every human culture anyway, if not every individual human being, every human culture has come to the question of three major proofs that they become obsessed with. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go when we die? Those are the three questions that seem inherent to our DNA. It is literally like we are programmed with a need to resolve those three questions. And from what I can tell, every culture has aspired to answer those three questions in some way. And so you have these three questions that seem inherent to our DNA. And so I thought, okay, well, so if I'm on a deserted island, it's reasonable to conclude that I might ask the same question. That might be the exact same, these would be the questions I would likely come to. And so that was my starting point. And so as I started to work from there, I said, okay, well, if I can only work from what's observable, I don't have access to all of the scientific discoveries that we have right now. I don't have access to ideologies, to things that other people have made up. I don't have access to religions. I only have what I can observe to attempt to answer those questions. And so how might I begin to answer those questions? And so then I started down the path of, well, where did we come from? And that led led me to, well, where did all of this stuff come from? And as I started kind of going through this thought experiment and looking around at this imaginary world, I realized that there were only two things that I could come up with. One was that everything has just kind of always been, or something created this. And those are the only two rational conclusions that you could come up with, because in the natural, I can observe myself creating something. And so the process of creation, of taking something and making something more with it, taking chaos and turning it into order, that is something that I can observe in my natural experience. Yeah, you're welcome. Are you good? Do you want me to continue with the answer, or are you good? I don't want to waste your time if you got what you're looking for. Okay, cool. Right on, man. Well, I'll continue down the path and show you how I got there. Because, like I said, my goal isn't to debate or to convince. My goal is merely to share, and then you take your own path, right? So anyway, so I went down this path and I said, all right, so then I can observe creation, or I can kind of rationalize that it's always been there. But the problem with the idea of something always being there was that that's not observable. That's something I basically have to invent that or accept that as a reality, without any type of evidence, because you can't provide evidence for something having always been there unless you're the thing that has always been there, right? And so from inside the aquarium, you can't just decide that everything has always been there. That doesn't work. And so what that left me with was the only rational conclusion I could come up with was something must have made all of this stuff. And it was at that moment that I realized that I actually think agnosticism is really the most rational point of view to all of the views that are out there. If you're going to stay within the realm of the observable, then agnosticism is actually the most rational position, because within the realm of the observable, we can observe that there is far too much information and there is far too much data and far too much that we don't understand, that forces us to have to accept the fact that this is just something that can't be known. And so as a result of that, I think agnosticism, if we're going to stay within only what is demonstratable or observable, that is the most rational place. Let me keep reading. Logical reasoning for God can lead to creator, but not to a specific God. Yep, 100%. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And so I love that you brought that up, because that's exactly what happened for me, right? So I hit creator and I was like, okay, cool. So I think most logical conclusion here is something made all this stuff. And so that led me to the idea of creator. And so it was from that moment that I rejected the concept of atheism. I said, okay, the idea that nothing made all of this doesn't work, because I can't get there from things that I can observe. And the idea that it's always been here doesn't work, because it's the same logical cliff, because it's like you get to a point where your logic on what's observable kind of it's like we hit the edge of the aquarium is kind of the best way I like to describe it. It's like there's this mental aquarium and we hit the wall, and you can't go past that point without entering into the realm of opening yourself up to the spiritual, or opening yourself up to, and when I say spiritual, I just simply mean outside of what is observable within our natural experience. Caught up on the fact that almost every religion condemns folks to suffering for possibly getting their faith wrong. Yep, 100%. No, and that's so. I'm going to come back to that, because I think I have a good answer for that, because I ran into the same problem and I really had to work through that one. And the answer that the Lord gave me really it was the satisfactory answer, and it satisfied both my logic as well as my my sense of compassion. So, but I want to come back to that because I want to finish this framework, and then from there let's get into specifics, because I think you make a good point, right? It's like, okay, we can get to creator logically, but how do we get to specific God? And that's the real question. So once I got to the intellectual cliff and I said, okay, so now I've reached the end of the aquarium, if you will. There's clearly no way that I can go past this point of okay, there's a creator without moving into the realm of faith or spirit or whatever that is, right? So when I hit that point, what I did is I started asking questions. Said, okay, well, I've concluded that there is a creator. So what type of things can I conclude about the creator based on what is observable, right? Like what this creator has created. Because I know that as like if I look at art, I can tell a lot about the artist by the things that they make. You can get a pretty good sense of whether they're angry or frustrated or happy. You can get a good sense of their feelings. You can get a good sense of their influences. All of those things you can kind of derive from the things that the creator created. And so that's my next step. I said, okay, can I begin to derive anything from this creator based on their creation? And so at first I was like, well, I mean, this creator really created quite a bit of a mess. Like, this world sucks, But then as I started down the path, I began to kind of, again, I went down the thought exercise and I said, well, what sucks about it? And the more I started to look at it, the more I was like, the thing that sucks about it is people. Like, people are the thing that makes everything suck. Like, when I go into a garden that's like well groomed, or even like, areas in like rainforest and things like that, man, there are things in creation that are just astoundingly beautiful. And everything in creation seems to be oriented around us. That was the other thing that I observed. That was kind of like one of the ones that stood out the most, was that everything in creation seems to point to the fact that it was designed around human beings. And that really gave me, like, I think that kind of like pointed to me the idea of a more personal God versus an impersonal God, because an impersonal God would just make everything as everything, right? And there wouldn't be a reason to kind of orient things around one particular group within their creation. And so I at least looked at that and said, okay, at the very least, for whatever reason, we are like the focal point of this thing. And so that then kind of led me down the path of saying, okay, well, if we're the focal point, well, what does that mean? Like, and so again, so I started going down that path. I started looking at how we're designed as human beings. We are, like, one of the core fundamentals of humans is that we are highly relational. And so that became very clear to me, was like, okay, there's like, relationship is a core element of our existence and of us as beings. And so that was kind of one of the things that I started going, okay, so then relationship is a major factor here. And like I said, I literally just kind of walked down the path of trying to derive some understanding of the characteristics of this creator. And ultimately what I came to after I looked at everything is I said, okay, the one thing I feel very confident in is that whoever created this was meticulous at just an extraordinarily high level. Like, when you look at the human eye and how it's designed, when you look at the complexity of human emotion, human relationships, the complexity of just creation in and of itself, it just came to me that there's a lot of flaws in biological life, mutation, climate, natural suffering, etc. Yeah, agreed, right? So I don't disagree with you that there are what we might define as flaws. I think that falls back into the suffering question, which I'll answer again. I'll come back to that one. But the biggest thing that I would say is, regardless of, like, let's look at it like this. Let's say we're not going to argue whether it's a flaw or whether it's actually good design that we don't understand, right? Because the only way that we can call it a flaw is by assuming that we have superior logic and superior understanding to be able to evaluate the thing that's been created, right? Because we're observing things like, I mean, God, you think about stuff that happens, like, just in life, right? That we might observe as a flaw or as a failure. And it's because of the fact that we lack the context to see how that the thing that seems like a flaw is actually a feature of design, right? And so, but let's not have that argument. Let's just pretend for a moment that that maybe it is a flaw, right? The thing that I said that I realized was I felt like was demonstrable regardless of whether there were flaws or not, was that the level of care and intricacy and the level of for lack of a better word, intentionality in all that has been created was extremely high. And so whatever made all of this stuff, it just seemed highly unlikely to me. Again, working from the observable, right? Because I anything outside of what I can observe in human nature, in human interaction, and the way that we interact with the world, anything outside of that is imagination. That's just me making stuff up. So working from only within the observable, if I got to creator through the idea of observing that, well, things can be created. I can't envision chaos forming or order forming out of chaos by itself without an outside actor, and I can't observe things always being here. So then I have to work from what is observable. I can observe creation. Then if I'm starting to try to get at the nature of the creator, trying to understand the nature of the creator, then I have to again work from the observable. And so if I'm observing how I would interact with something that's created, or how an artist might interact with something that's created, if an artist puts an extraordinary amount of effort and detail into a thing, they tend to care deeply for and about the outcome of that thing, right? Like no artist goes in and puts, 10,000 hours into a painting and then just doesn't care about who it goes to, where it goes, what happens to it. They have a vested interest in that part because they've invested too much to not have a vested interest. And so it seemed to me that regardless of whether flawed or not flawed, whatever created all this probably had a highly vested interest in the outcome of what they created, just simply by the amount of design that went into it. And so that then led me to the place of going, okay, so we've got a creator here that is not a set it and forget it creator, but somebody who should have a vested interest in this, again, based on what's observable. And so then I started moving into the next phase of saying, okay, well then if that's the case, does it seem reasonable that if we as human beings are highly relational beings and we seem to be the central focal point of what was created, and the being that created us seems to have a highly vested interest in what they created, and reasonably so given the level of investment that's gone into it, well, then it seems reasonable that that being might have attempted to communicate with us. And so that was kind of my next step was, well, okay, then it seems reasonable that that being would have wanted to communicate. And so now I have to go in and I have to look at, is there anything in creation or in the human experience that indicates this being attempting to communicate with us? And so that's kind of led me to religions, of course, because then I went and said, okay, so we've got all these different people saying that God has communicated with them, and they're all saying varying degrees of the same stuff, right? I mean, if you look at, and I kind of whittled it down because I looked at it from a thing of ancient religions are probably the closest versus newer religions, because ancient religions have they would have been closer to the source. So my conclusion was that if I'm going to go with anything, I need to start with something that's from antiquity, because it was the closest to the source, and the further you get from the source, the more degraded it becomes. And so that kind of began my starting point of like, okay, if this God has, or this creator has attempted to created something and cared to communicate with it, if it attempted to communicate with us, then it seems like it probably would have happened much earlier versus later, and then from there we can move forward. If someone told you to pick from a bag of colored rocks and you picked a blue rock, I'm interested to see where this is going. Just waiting for the rest. Real two in the bag had 200 green rocks and only one blue rock. Okay. Yeah, I get where you're going with this. Yeah, because basically what you're... Did the person choose blue or green rock? Yeah, 100%. No, he's not pointing to coincidence. What he's pointing to is it seems capricious to allow for all of these different religions to exist and then condemn the person who chooses the wrong one without making it demonstrably clear which religion is the right one. And that's more or less the argument, which I get the argument. So let's do this. Let me... Okay, so let me see if it would be better to answer that first. Okay, I think it's a good time for me to answer that question. So really, what you're trying to get at here is you're getting at the issue of it's a moral evaluation of more so a response to the intelligent creator. Yeah, 100%. So I think the way I would look at it, or this is really the way I look at it, is like this. Like this. One moment, guys. Sorry about that. Okay. So with regard to the question, it's really the question of like, is this creator capricious? Because that's kind of what that leads to. So I think my starting point is this: if there is a being that created everything, right? Like we're talking like the level of intelligence and design and superiority that would be required to create everything, right? That level of intelligence and design is so far superior to anything that I can even begin to try and comprehend, that my starting point with regard to a creator really has to be one of humility, not of evaluation. And so for me, my starting point was, okay, if something made all of this, then I have to begin my journey of exploring who created all this from the idea that I am not in a position to make a moral evaluation of their decisions about who they let in and who they don't, right? Like that's because it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't, like if we're to accept the premise that a being like this could exist, then we equally have to accept the premise that we're in no position to morally evaluate that being. And so now, typically speaking, what happens here when I say this is people move to, well, we're not evaluating the being, we're evaluating the religions. I don't think you can separate the two. I think you have to start with, before you even get into the religions, you just have to start with the idea of the being that made all this is so far superior to me that I have to move from a position of humility and learning as opposed to a position of evaluation. Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I wouldn't call myself an artist, but I wrote a book called The Book of Circles and Lines that's, it's like part art concept, part psychology. But anyway, I think you'd really enjoy it, and I'd love to send you a copy if you're an artist, because I think you'd enjoy the premise and the process. You seem like somebody who enjoys both art and logic, which I'm the same. So anyway, so yeah, just DM me if you want it, and I'll shoot you a free copy. But yeah, so basically the appreciate it. Yep, right? Exactly. Dude, I'm telling you, when you read it, you're going to love this book because it's such a... Anyway, you'll enjoy it. I'll just say that. And I'll also send you the Book of Possibility because that was the follow-up to the Book of Circles and Lines. They're both really fun reads. I think you'll like it. But yeah, definitely DM me and I'll send you a link to download them. They're totally free, no big deal. So yeah, so basically to kind of sum up the answer to your question, I don't think we can take the premise of there being a creator and then simultaneously take the position of evaluating the creator. That's more or less the way I had to approach it. And so from that position, that's where I started down the path of looking at, okay, if this being has communicated with humanity, what are the indications of that communication? And I kind of just put a rubric against it. So I went in and I looked at the religions that had the longest standing survivability. And what I found was you had Judaism, you had, what do you call it? I want to say it was I think it's Hinduism, because Buddhism's not really a religion. So you had Hinduism, you had Hinduism, you had Judaism. You could throw Islam in there, but I personally feel like Islam actually is an offshoot of Judaism, and so I don't really count Islam in there. I look at Islam as similar to Christianity, both of them being almost like branches off of Judaism, and so I look at Judaism as the root, and then those two as branches or offshoots. So you had Judaism, you had Hinduism. There's another religion, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like Gaiaism or something like that. It's like believing in the universe, essentially. So there's like a form of that's very ancient, that's been around for a long time. And then the rest of it, like all of the other, like we'll call like major religions, all of those other ones have pretty much fallen off or are no longer in practice. So the only ones that are still like actively in practice right now, with any type of like high level scope and scale, would be Judaism, Hinduism, and then this kind of like universalism type thing. And so sorry, my wife is texting me here, give me just a sec, guys. Let's see here. Yeah, there you go. So Scientology is too new. Paganism is too broad, because paganism like encompasses all of the different like multi-god religions, but there's not enough continuity in any of them. And so I kind of feel like that one is almost like that to me is like the same thing as like universalism-ish, if you will, except universalism is like the belief that the universe itself is God, whereas paganism attributes attributes to specific deities and beings, but there's no continuity there. There are too many like different groups that all kind of branch off of it. Agnostic, completely agree with you. I think that's the most rational position to take. And then yeah, Scientology, that cracks me up. Freaking wild. So, but yeah, Abrahamic triad, love that. So yeah, so basically where I ended up was I said, okay, so Judaism seems to be, or if we want to go further back and just call it Abrahamic triad, we could say like really that's the most ancient and still practiced. And so then I started looking at all of the different, you call it like the big ones, right? So if we had Hinduism, we had Abrahamic triad, which Judaism evolved out of, and then Christianity, obviously. So we start with Abrahamic triad. Gnosticism, I don't think is regularly practiced anymore, and it also doesn't. The biggest thing that Gnosticism doesn't do well is it doesn't meet the criteria of the big three, and it borrows too much from Abrahamic triad. And so that's where I feel like it's like Abrahamic triad, Hinduism, and then you could throw paganism in there if you want, and then like universe, right? So the problem we run into is going back to that big three that's hardwired into the DNA. The only one that I found that actually offered a good answer with continuity to all three was your Abrahamic triad, and then Judaism as kind of the more developed form of that. And so that to me was like the thing that was like the linchpin for me, if you will, because I sat down and said, okay, if I'm going to use something as like the measuring stick to determine which one of these seems to represent that communication from the creator, then I want to start with the three questions that seem inherent to our DNA. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go when we die? And so I started looking for the answers to those questions within these different expressions of supposed God communication. And what I found was that Judaism had the most complete answer to all three of them and held the best continuity between the three as well. Whereas I felt like Hinduism, you get into some like weird, like some really funky stuff with the way that those are answered. And it just did, and there's the continuity I didn't feel like was there. Same issue with paganism. There were too many options at that point, and same problem, too much continuity, not enough agreement among the different sects. And so again, it just felt like there was a lack of continuity. And so when I really like broke it all down, what I ultimately concluded was I felt like Judaism truly had the best answer to the three questions that every human being seems to ask. And so if I'm going on purely what's observable, then it's like, okay, I go from observable, it's creator, okay, then we move from creator to creator that very likely has a vested interest in what they've created. And so as a result of that, it seems reasonable that they probably attempted to communicate with humanity. And if they attempted to communicate with humanity, then the likelihood of that communication finding its origins in antiquity is high. And so starting with the most long-standing religious, spiritual ideals of antiquity, what are the longest standing, that narrowed it down to a small handful, Abrahamic triad, Hinduism, universe, right? And then from there, then discerning between the three and saying, what is the criteria that I'm going to use to choose one of these? Then that criteria is answer to the big three and continuity leads me to Judaism. Okay, so now I land on Judaism and I said, okay, so, and all of this was based in the premise of understanding that I can't approach this from the position of evaluating the morality or evaluating the premise beyond the guardrails that I gave it, right? But I had to go into it with the understanding that I'm gonna hit a point in this where I'm just gonna have to kind of like jump off the intellectual cliff and see where this takes me. And that was really like, to me, that's where agnosticism ends. Agnosticism hits the wall when it reaches the point where it's like, with what's observable, I can only go as far as it cannot be known, right? Or there will always be more to know. But there comes a place where if you basically have to make a choice. You're either going to stay in the state of I can never know, or you're going to make a decision to commit to and follow through a channel, if you will, and see where that channel takes you. And so that was essentially where I came to with Judaism. I said, okay, this is the channel. And so now I have to make a decision about whether I'm going to jump into that channel and see where that channel takes me. So from there, I hit Judaism and I said, all right, the only problem with Judaism is that I have Christianity here that is kind of like bolted onto it and is the thing that has extended the life of Judaism to now be practiced in modern time, because a lot of the tenets of Judaism, even though they're still Jews, like there's no temple, nobody is sacrificing things on altars anymore. So there's a lot of tenets of Judaism that didn't survive the death of Christ. And so I had to look at that and go, okay, well, for me to accept Judaism as being still relevant today as a core belief system, I have to then go in and determine, does Christianity have the same level of continuity answering the big three? Can it be reasonably connected to Judaism? And really all of that just ultimately led me to Jesus and just saying, okay, the real linchpin here is Jesus. Either Jesus was who he said he was, or he wasn't. And if he was who he said he was, then that proves the rest of Judaism, because Jesus, throughout the totality of his life, affirms Judaism. And if he wasn't who he said he was, then Judaism falls out, because Judaism isn't even currently practiced anymore in its current state. And so now I have to move into something else, basically. And so, so from there, I was like, all right, this brings me to the question of Jesus. Is Jesus who he said he was? And then going back to where I started, I recognize there's no way I'm going to be able to definitively 100% concretely prove this. So I'm still going to have to take a leap of faith at some point and see. It's almost like sending a message out into space, believing that there's something out there. All I can do is send the message out and see if something comes back, right? I kind of felt the same way with jumping off that logical cliff and saying, okay, Jesus said to do some things. Let me try putting those things into practice and throw something out there and see if anything comes back. That was kind of the mentality that I was operating from. And so I came to this place of saying, all right, I got to figure out if Jesus can be proven. So I started again with what's observable. And so I read a lot of books about the life of Christ. One that I found to be particularly convincing was The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. I don't know if you've ever read it, but he was an atheist and also an investigative journalist. And he set out essentially to prove that that Jesus was not who he said he was. And so he goes through and he used all of the tools of investigative journalism and did interviews, did research, and basically became a Christian as a result of the process, which was hilarious. But he chronicles the journey that he took, and he chronicles all the different things that he subjected the life of Christ to in order to come to the conclusion he came to. And so some of the like core ideals, and I won't go through the whole thing, but two of like the really major points that he proved out was, the first one was, did Jesus exist? Which pretty much anybody that has any type of real credentials in history is not making the argument that Jesus didn't exist. So that part, like, we can say, okay, based on everything that we know about history, if we're going to say that Julius Caesar exists, we have to say Jesus existed. And so Jesus existed, that part, that's locked in. So the next question was, okay, was Jesus God? Right? And there are two things that we have to look at to be able to answer that question. The first one is there reasonable evidence that he was raised from the dead? I read that in your youth group days. Don't remember much of it. Yeah, 100%. It might be worth revisiting. It was, I didn't read it until I was at a point where there was a reason for me to care about the information. And so, yeah, might be worth revisiting, but either way, like I said, not here to convince you. So basically my next step was, is there reasonable evidence that he raised from the dead? You look at that and it's like, it's hard to make the argument that the disciples lied about it, right? And I feel like there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that that doesn't make sense. So while we can't definitively prove that he did raise from the dead, it is very difficult to explain what happened. And that's really the biggest thing, is like, it's like trying to prove a negative, right? Even though we can't like definitively prove that he did raise from the dead, it is very difficult to explain what happened after he died if he didn't raise from the dead. You know what I mean? And so that was kind of I felt like was a pretty convincing proof. The second thing I thought was interesting was that Jesus is one of the only people, and maybe actually the only person in human history, who claimed to be God, made like a definitive God claim, and actually is still relevant thousands of years after his death. Every other person throughout the course of human history that I can think of who made definitive God claims has not stood the test of time. And so that, I thought, was a very interesting and unique thing about Jesus, is he made a definitive God claim and has stood the test of time, which is peculiar to say the least. Another one is looking at the things that he taught. You kind of have to look at it and go, how do you separate the things that he teaches, which are tremendously profound and well beyond his time, and then simultaneously make the argument that he was insane because he claimed that he was God and he was willing to go to a cross, which was like the most horrific way for a human being to die, went to the cross still claiming to be God. Like, you have to have a screw loose to be able to do that. And so to be able to look at his teaching, and there was a part of what Lee Strobel did is he went to a psychologist, a couple of them actually, and had them evaluate the things that Jesus said and the way that he taught, and then look at that and see if there was anything that might register a crazy person. And now you might look at that and go, well, how could they possibly do that? Well, they actually do that right now with the FBI. Whenever people are like bombers and things like that, if they're trying to figure out where that person is, if that person has put writing out, they'll go read the writing to create a psychological profile of the individual that is making the threats, and that psychological profile is then used to help them locate the person. And so you can build a psychological profile off the writings of a person. So if you go and you do a psychological profile on Jesus, the profile does not produce a crazy person. The profile actually produces a person who is profoundly sane and actually is profoundly advanced in their intellect. And so the thing that would allow them to make a God claim and go to a cross over it and to do the other, those two things don't pair up very well. And so that I felt like was an interesting proof. But the one that pushed it over the edge for me was honestly the fact that, and it was weird, I feel like God was speaking to me during this time. I didn't realize it at the time that I was being guided, but in hindsight, I think that's what it was. So I had this sort of vision of a pond, right? And you throw a rock in a pond and it sends out ripples. The bigger the rock, the further out the ripples go. But no matter how big of a rock you throw in the pond, the ripples eventually die out. So if you go, like Julius Caesar, throw that rock on the pond, he sent ripples out. Those ripples ended at a certain point. Like his influence ended at a certain point. Same thing with Hitler. A lot of different people throughout history. The ripples, let's call the ripples their influence. Their influence ends at a certain point. The thing that is very strange about Jesus is that throughout the course of human history, there are these moments where it looks like someone threw a Jesus rock in the pond again, and it started sending ripples out again. And that is a very, very strange, particularly for a person who is supposedly dead. Now, you could try to claim that that has to do with their followers, but I don't think that supports it well enough, because even if you have the most ardent followers, at some point the ripples have to die out, because the momentum of the story and the momentum of the influence eventually has to die. It has to. Everything in history tells us this. So the fact that Jesus continues to pop up and create new ripples that then go out is really freaking weird, and it just doesn't make any sense. And so when I paired all of that up with historical evidence that he definitely existed, the fact that who he was, what he said, and the way he died, and the claims that he made don't pair up well unless he actually was who he said he was, and then the fact that his influence continues to show up and to go out into the world, all of those things collectively led me to the place of saying, I feel like in order for me to disprove this, I have to be able to make a strong argument against him being who he said he was. And I just couldn't find a reasonable argument that gave sufficient evidence to overwhelm the evidence to the contrary. And so from that point, that was the place where I finally said, okay, I'm going to take the leap of faith. I'm going to say, Jesus, you're real. I'm believing in you. I'm starting from a place not of evaluation, but from a place of learning and humility, and accepting the fact that if you were who you say you are, and if there is a God who created all of this stuff, I am not in the position of evaluation, and I need to come from a position of learning. And so let me submit myself not to people, not to a church, but to the teachings that I see from Jesus. That was my starting point. And let me submit myself to the teachings of Scripture, because Jesus affirmed the Scriptures throughout the totality of his life. And so that is how my journey actually began. And I spent a year reading the Bible. I had a couple of kind of interesting spiritual experiences, like where I started writing in tongues and stuff like that. I didn't actually know what was happening. And so I had those experiences. But there was nothing really particular that happened like right out of the gate. It's not like I had this, like a Saul of a Saul experience where Jesus showed up to me and I fell off my horse kind of thing. But for a year, I read every single day, and I fasted and I prayed and I submitted myself to what I read in the scriptures. And it wasn't until almost exactly a year after I started that process that I was at work, and yeah, 100%. Oh, trust me, the stuff that came after will be more interesting. So I'll share the after. But so I came to this moment where I was standing at work, and I just had sorry, I want to sense the spirit before I share that. Okay, cool. It's okay for me to share this. So, I'm standing at work. I was a manager at an AT&T store. Get a call from my boss. He tells me that our store is upside down by 30 grand, and my store regularly generated about 40 to 45K in revenue. So it's like, for us to be that far off is like a level of theft or negligence that is difficult to explain away. And so when he told me that, like, my heart sank, because I mean, I'm sitting here going, it's not even like I have an idea of where to even begin to go down the path of trying to explain how this is possible. And so in that moment, like the anxiety, like everything, I mean, I was sunk. Like, I'm standing here in my store, I felt my knees go weak, my face paled, I felt sick. And like right in that moment, I heard in my spirit, is the best way I can describe it, because it wasn't audible, but it was audible, like a vibration inside myself, is the best way I can really explain it. And I literally heard the spirit. He said, "Be at peace, I am with you." And every part of me was at peace instantly. I had no fear, I had no worry. It was just a supernatural moment. And I never heard from my boss again. To this day, I still have no idea what happened to that money, to the phones. He never brought it up again. Like, it was bizarre, like made no sense. I literally never brought it up again. I worked there for another year and a half, and he just never brought it up. It was like nothing ever happened, and I still to this day don't know what happened. So that was the beginning of my journey with God. And everything that happened after that has been a process of just walking with him, and him showing up in just incredible ways. And so the strength of my faith is not reliant on something that someone taught me at a church. It's not reliant on religion. It's not even reliant really on like the Bible itself. What it's truly reliant on is the fact that I followed the logical path as far as I could take it in the natural, and ended up at Jesus. And then at Jesus, I took a leap of faith into the kind of the spiritual, if you will. And everything that's happened after that has been just consistent moments of evidence of him proving out that he is exactly who he said he is. And so that would be my answer as to kind of like a long roundabout answer anyway, to the starting point for you. So my encouragement to you, if this is a journey you're even interested in looking at, which I know you're at the point of agnosticism right now, if you are at the place where you're interested in moving beyond agnosticism, what I might encourage you to do is to look at the whatever faiths are out there. Find one, doesn't even matter what it is. It could be Hinduism, but find something that you feel like that has the continuity and, hey, makes sense, right? And then from there, take a leap and see where it takes you, because my belief is we are trapped in a cognitive framework until we step into the spiritual and begin to allow ourselves to navigate the spiritual, because it's there. It's just we can't get there from a cognitive framework, because our cognitive framework is the fish tank. There is a spiritual part to us, which is our soul, that is capable of touching the spiritual. That is the part of us that we have to step into to find out what's past what our cognitive framework can reason out. And that's the choice. We either have to stay within what we can do rationally and logically and say we're just not going to go past that point, or we have to set that aside and say, there are boundaries to this, and in order to find out if there's more beyond those boundaries, I have to accept the fact that if there is something beyond this, that this has to be subordinate to that. And I can't subordinate that to this, otherwise it's still this, if that makes sense. So break down the walls I built between myself and religion. Hey, I love that, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that I'm not a believer in religion, at least in the sense of the way that it's used more commonly. I think religion in its most simple form is just the statutes, doctrines, and ideals put into an organized fashion. So I'm not anti-religion, but I am against what religion does, because religion often, or let's call it a spirit of religion, co-ops what is real and or co-ops what is intended to be spiritual and subordinates it to the natural in order to control, and that is tremendously evil, and God doesn't do that. And so that's yeah, anyway, all of that to say, I definitely get where you're at, and I'm glad I can help to at least break down some walls, man. So let me ask you this, PYTN. Do you care if I pray for you and just ask for the Lord to guide you on this journey and to make Himself real to you, if that's something that you're open and interested to finding? Oh yeah, 100%. Look around you type reasoning. Yeah. Right on, right on. Well, then let me pray for you right now, and because I'm gonna have to get out of here pretty quick. I gotta go get stuff for the kids, but let me pray for you real quick, and then I'll conclude this live. As I presume your name's not PYTN, can I pray for you by name, or should I just pray for you in the spirit? Peyton. Oh, PYTN. I love it. Nice. My man. My man. All right. Well, let me pray for you, Peyton. Father, thank you for Peyton's tremendous heart to not be a person who has closed himself off to truth due to circumstances and experiences. Thank you for their heart, for being open and willing to continue seeking what is true. And Lord, I know that those who seek find, because that's what your word says, and that's what your character is. You do not hide yourself from those who seek you, and you are the truth. And so I just ask right now that as Peyton is continuing to seek the truth, because I believe that that's what Peyton cares about. That's why Peyton is not quick to accept anybody's religious ideals, anything that somebody would try to cast onto them. They are looking for the truth. And so, Lord, knowing that you are the truth, I just ask that you would reveal yourself to them through your Spirit, that you would make them feel your presence right now, and that over the coming time that you would guide them into all truth, because that is what you promise to those who seek you, Lord. And so I just thank you for Peyton. I thank you for the desire for truth that you have placed in them, and I just pray that you will continue to be with them through this journey, protect their mind from just all of the foolishness of the world, and just keep their heart pure and centered on truth, because in truth, they will find the truth. Amen. All right, Peyton. Hey, so good to meet you. I'm going to keep making content. Feel free to jump in, ask any questions if you have them on my stuff. And like I said, DM me and let me send you those two books, because I think you'll enjoy Circles and Lines and the Book of Possibility. They'll be fun, particularly for an artist. Britt, thanks for being on. As always, I appreciate you. Yeah, you too. See ya. And Tracy, sorry, I'm literally just jumping off. I got to go grab some stuff for the kids, but I'll jump on probably again either tomorrow or Thursday. So I will be back, and I'm also about to drop a new video here in as soon as I get off of this live. So make sure to check that out as well. Yeah, thanks, Britt. I appreciate it. All right, I'm gonna jump. I'll see you guys soon, and make sure you check out that video when I get it. See ya.